Well, for more on the topic, I'm joined by Marie Wong, live from Seattle. She's an expert in urban design and planning. Welcome, Marie.
Thank you.
Now, Marie, how would you describe the current state of areas like Chinatown, Little Italy, and these other immigrant hubs in U.S. cities?
I think that all of these areas are in a really fragile position right now because as cities become more urbanized, cities are looking at ways of increasing densities, and unfortunately, those increases in densities are often done at the expense of existing poor and ethnic neighborhoods.
And as we take a step back, let's have a look. Why did these areas even come into existence? And do they meet the current needs of the immigrant community?
Well, the history of Chinatown development is actually kind of a two-pronged part of historic development. That the Chinese, the conditions in China with floods and famines and internal insurrections, international wars were ones that were kind of pushing those immigrants into looking at a better life, a better economic life. And so places like the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand were all kind of the focus of areas where those new immigrants could come, make a better life for themselves and hopefully a better life for their families. So they were looking at urban cores and those areas where they could settle, and I'm going to say settle safely. And you kind of see that there was a shift in history where many of these communities living in rural environments, as violence and discrimination against the Chinese were escalating, those individuals would leave those less populated areas and rural areas and come into the safety of kind of that urban shelter. And so a lot of these Chinatowns were both a product of coercion and of choice. So
now, being the current situation isn't that they're at war at the moment, would you say that they still meet a need, having these Chinatowns? What purpose do they serve now, would you say?
Well, there's still, I can speak about Seattle's Chinatown International District and that Chinatown core, that there are still a pretty significant population of Cantonese-speaking, non-English speaking residents that have made their homes in the residential hotels that have been part of Seattle's Chinatown since 1910. So they still have a really vibrant function for those immigrants that have been part of the city for a long, long time. And it's an area that has a very high population of elderly and of individuals who are far below the city's median income.
Now, Marie, in terms of some of the key factors, the report that we had earlier mentioned gentrification. Would you say that's the main factor behind the shifts that we're seeing in the U.S. urban landscape?
I think that this combination, it's really a very complicated kind of issue, but as densities are increasing and as cities are looking at ways of becoming economically stronger, if you're looking at, high manufacturing sectors like what you're seeing in Chicago, or if you're looking at high-tech industries like what is happening in Seattle, people are literally flooding into the city. The last estimate that I saw was that Seattle is growing at a rate of about 1,000 people a month. And so trying to find available housing has become one of the most private or valuable commodities that exist within the city. And as that demand increases, so does the demand for real estate, which coincidentally drives the cost of real estate even higher. So those buildings that cater to low-income populations start looking at the opportunities to redevelop that property. Now, unlike some areas, Seattle's Chinatown has had a preservation ordinance that has surrounded that historic core of the neighborhood since at least the mid-1980s. So in some ways, those buildings, I'm going to say, are quasi-protected. Nothing absolutely protects these buildings from being redeveloped.
And Marie, just quickly, in terms of the future of these Chinatowns, is it something that we're going to see disappear?
I think that it depends on how we are going to define Chinatown, and there have been so many changes that have taken place in the United States, not the least of which is how people identify themselves. Chinatown, without a question, is going to be changing. I think it's just how are we going to define the residents that are living there, And how do we look at Chinatown with respect to authenticity? Are we trying to retain historic quality that keeps changing, as the years go by? Are we satisfied with looking at the incorporation of design motifs and characteristics that kind of satisfy what we believe Chinatown needs to look like?
Right.
Or are we looking at something that is more contemporary as part of the built environment? So I think that that's something that is really going to be, it's going to have to be addressed by city policymakers, administrators, people who work with nonprofit agencies, and definitely with community activists that are looking at ways of keeping Chinatown a very vibrant part of a living community,
right,
as opposed to something that is just for tourism.
Marie, sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. Marie Wong joining us, urban planning expert. Thank you so much.
If you like what you just saw, follow us on social media and visit our website, cctv-america.com.